I have nothing left to say now. He said it all. Questions? I did not bring any film clips. I didn't know I was supposed to, so nobody mentioned that to me. And in fact, I brought notes, handwritten notes, so I really went low tech for this. But as he said, I am a graduate of the University of Missouri. I graduated in 1985, and Dr. Porter, as I knew him then, was one of my professors. I'm going to be talking a little, I think, a different perspective than most of the other people who have spoken today, in terms of I'm really coming from really more of a Hollywood perspective and a more of a perspective of not really a documentary, but just making things up, storytelling, as opposed to more of a documentary storytelling. I think probably for me, the reason I got into, or wanted to get into film, really part of my inspiration was when I was a kid, probably Walt Disney, and then a little later George Lucas, because I had seen American Graffiti, and I thought, well, this is really great. I mean, this is a really great movie. And I was probably 12 or 13 at the time when I saw it, and I thought, well, this is something I could do. I mean, this was like a lot of fun. It was it was an interesting movie, and I liked the music, and I liked the acting, and I liked everything about it. And I kept going back to see the movie again and again and again, and it kind of occurred to me that, this might be something you can do. And I, like a lot of people my age, I grew up watching great cartoons on TV like Johnny Quest. And I guess in my head, I had always thought that these must be like genius people who come up with all these great cartoons, because when I was a kid, this seemed like genius to me. And then as I got kind of a little older, I kind of realized, well, it's just regular guys kind of writing it. It's not really geniuses, and I'm a pretty regular guy. So when I graduated from high school, I decided to come to MU. And they didn't really have a film program per se. They had a radio, TV, and film major that you could do, but it was through communications. Or you could go through journalism, and I didn't really want to go through journalism because it was really more documentary. And although I really liked journalism and had worked on the paper at school, I didn't really want to go that way. So I decided not to go to journalism. So I ended up in communications, and I took a lot of classes that had nothing to do with film. I took a radio class, I took a history of broadcasting class, a lot of stuff that really had nothing to do. I learned Arbitron ratings. I was never going to work in radio, but it was very fascinating to learn all that stuff. I really enjoyed it. And actually, that was the first time I had really got a chance to do any writing. Is they had, there was one writing class where you had to write, we wrote radio commercials all the time. And you would write like little 30-second commercials, and I really enjoyed that, and I was pretty good at writing those little 30-minute commercials. So I thought, well, this is something I could do. So when I graduated, I really wasn't sure what to do. So I was kind of hanging out in Columbia, and I was kind of thinking, at the time, there was a lot of TV production centered in Atlanta, because that's where Ted Turner was, that's where TBS was, that's where TNT was, that's where CNN was. And so they were really doing a lot of stuff down there. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll go to Atlanta. I hadn't really thought about going to California. And then I met this girl. And so I hung out for another year, waiting for her to finish school. We ended up getting married. And in that time, I thought, well, I think I'm going to go to graduate school. I think I want to go to California because I really want to pursue filmmaking. And originally, I didn't really want to be necessarily a writer. I wanted to go into production. And so I applied, and actually Dr. Porter had suggested Loyola Marymount, because one of his colleagues had worked there, and he suggested, well, it's a really good school, you should try it out, because it wasn't a really big school, unlike USC or UCLA, and everybody made films there, unlike some of the other schools in which just like 3 or 4 people made films and everybody else worked on the crew there. And so I applied to graduate school there, and I got accepted. So I got married, and a week later we moved to California. And the nice thing about grad school is it kind of allowed me to move to California, but not have to jump in and find a job immediately, because I wasn't really sure how to find a job, because it's like, I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was kind of a nice in for me to go to graduate school. And originally I started in production there. And I did that for, about a year, and I made a film. And it was really expensive. And I thought, well, I don't know about this production thing. And then I took my first screenwriting class. And the professor was Bob Merrill, and Bob Merrill is a terrific writer. He actually is a Broadway writer. He wrote Funny Girl, And he wrote a ton. He wrote a ton of. He was a songwriter who just happened to write scripts too. He wrote a lot of novelty songs, like "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window." He was but he was a really nice guy. And I had written a couple of like short scripts, and he thought I had some talent for writing. And so I thought, well, I'm going to save myself some money because paper is pretty cheap. So I decided I'm going to go into screenwriting. And while I was there, I met my writing partner. I work with a partner, so if I say we, it's he and I. But he was going to actually come today, but he didn't make it. So I'm going to take credit for all the good stuff, and he gets the blame for all the bad stuff because he didn't come. So while I was there, I met my writing partner, and we had a very similar sensibility. And I think we were the only two married graduate students there because we were both kind of a little bit older. And so we just kind of hit it off. And we kind of started going, maybe we should write some scripts together. And so he kind of had this really dumb idea for a short film about these two 17th century pirates that come to the present, and they go off on this adventure. And so I thought, well, it's kind of an interesting idea. I think we could make that a feature. And so we ended up writing this it's kind of a Roald Dahl kind of script about these two pirates, and they find this little orphan kid, and the whole movie they are going to kill him as soon as they get the treasure. But it was a lot of fun to write, and we finished that script, and we didn't really know exactly what to do with it. In the meantime, we were kind of finishing up our graduate degrees, and so our wives were kind of honest to get jobs and stop laying around the house. So I ended up getting a job working in the legal field. And my writing partner was actually a tour guide at Universal for a while. And then he ended up getting a job as an assistant to one of the executives there. The executive was Nina Jacobson, who went on to become the president of Disney, president of production at Disney. So not that really helped us in the least, but she was like a low-level executive at Disney, and she was very easy to work for. And his job all day was basically just answering phones, setting up meetings, and my job was basically reviewing legal documents, even though I had no experience in that either. But every night we would work all day, and then we would do whatever our graduate class was, and then we would come home and write every night for like 2 hours, and it was so exhausting and so tiring. But eventually we finished a second script, which was Trackdown. That was the second script we ever wrote, and it was about some terrorists who had taken over the English Channel Tunnel. At the time, that tunnel between England and France was just getting finished, and so some terrorists take it over. So it was a very die-hard kind of story, but we were kind of thinking, how can we kind of kick this story into something different and make it a little, something unique? And so we kind of hit upon this idea of what if the main character was a woman, but not like a, kick-ass G.I. Jane kind of woman, but more like she's an engineer. She doesn't know anything about killing people. She doesn't know anything about shooting guns. She doesn't know how to beat people up. She's just a really smart lady. And the way she's going to beat these guys is just knowing the tunnel better than anybody else. And so we had written this script up, and right before we finished it, I had another friend that worked at 20th Century Fox, and we went into a meeting with his boss. She was an executive there. He was very nice, and he got us a meeting there. And we went in and we pitched the story to her, and the first thing she said is, well, I like it, but does the main character have to be a woman? Can it be a man? And we're like, well, that's kind of the selling feature. We're like, okay. And she goes, and does it have to be a tunnel in Europe? Can't it be a tunnel in the United States, like a made-up tunnel, like one between Los Angeles and San Francisco? And so we said, well, yeah, that's an interesting idea. We could do that. And we decided, no, we're not going to do that. So, but part of that is just part and parcel of when you do development in Hollywood. Everybody thinks they know better than you, and most of their ideas are stupid. So we finished the script, and Ron, my writing partner, knew a producer on the lot that he was friendly with. And she offered to send the script to some agents for us. Because really the way you kind of, it works is you as a new writer, you go get an agent, and the agent submits your material all over town. And so she was very nice. She wrote a nice letter for us, and then we wrote a letter, and then we sent the whole thing as a package. And we went to, I think, 30 agencies. I mean, a ton of agencies. And we got turned down by almost everybody. One agency called us, and they really liked us. And they said, well, we think the script needs some work. We kind of want to do this. And it was a small agency. It's not really exactly where we wanted to be. And then we got a call from United Talent, which is one of the 4 big agencies in town. And I remember this perfectly. I was at work on a Monday, and I got this call from Ron that said, you need to come to UTA this afternoon. You need to get out of work and come down. They want to meet with us. So I'm like, okay. So we left, went down there on Monday. They did their whole song and dance about why we should sign with them, and they loved the script, and they thought it was great, and they thought it was terrific. And I think the lead agent hadn't even finished the script. He just said, I read half of it, and I knew it was a good script, and so that's what I wanted to do. And so we're like, well, okay, yeah, we'll sign with you guys. And so we went back to work, and they took off doing their thing. And by Thursday, they had sold the script for $1 million. Now, that is not a typical story of how people get their first job in Hollywood, but for us, that was kind of how it happened. Now, on the downside, a week after they had bought the script, they immediately fired us because we didn't know, what did we know about screenwriting? And then they hired a $1 million, script doctor. And what we didn't know at the time, but we found out later, is that, again, since the script had a female lead in it, and it was a really good female lead, and she was really smart, what we didn't know is that one of the producers they had gotten the script to was in touch with Jodie Foster. And Jodie Foster really wanted to do an action film, but she didn't want to say, go shoot 'em up, kill 'em film. So by happenstance, we happened to have a film about a smart lady that had a kid. We had to put a kid in the movie. And she was interested, and that's why Columbia put the money up for it, because they thought Jodie Foster was going to do it. And what I learned this morning is that, from the Act 3 guys, I don't know if they're still here, is that Hollywood is a lot like baseball. They will spend a lot of money to get all the best players, and it does not necessarily make you the best team. So Columbia spent a lot of money on us and subsequent writers to get the star happy, which ultimately did not work, but that's a little further down the story. So then, we were fired, but we were obligated by our WGA contract, which is the writers' union, that we had to do a draft of the script, even though we knew it was not going to go anywhere. So we did our draft of the script, we turned it in. In the meantime, we started writing a second script called The French Teacher, and it was about like a Secret Service agent who was masquerading as a French teacher at some kid's private school. And he takes these kids on some wilderness adventure out in the woods, and they end up getting kidnapped out there, and then in the third act, we burn Yosemite down. So it was a big action adventure script with kids. We ended up selling that, by happenstance again. How many of you remember the Northridge earthquake in '94? Big earthquake in California? Thanks, one person. If you had lived there, you would remember it. We sold the script the Friday before that earthquake happened on Monday. If we had waited until Monday, we would have not told the script, because all everybody would have talked about is that earthquake. So by happenstance, we sold that script just before, and then and it was actually with the original producer that we had gone out to agents with. So she was very nice, and they ended up buying that script. That was really a very uneventful story. I wish there was more to it, but we did a couple of drafts, and the script just kind of died. It didn't really go anywhere. I think what ended up happening is the producer ended up leaving the company, and they moved. It's happened so often. One change, and everything gets turned upside down, and suddenly they're not interested anymore. They want to go someplace else, so they want to go a different direction. But in the meantime, we were kind of trying to figure out what we were going to do next, and we got a call from Amblin, which is Spielberg's company, and they said, we want you guys to come in and talk to us. And so we went in, and we met with the guy who was the head of animation, and he said, well, Steven, because everybody calls him Steven there, they said Steven had seen Aladdin, and he was really kind of upset that Disney had done really what was like an action movie with animation. And so he wanted to do an action movie, because Amblin was just really starting to get into animation and do animation. So he said he really wants to do an action film with animation, and we said, well, we're not animation writers, so we don't know anything about animation, but we could do an action movie. And so he said, well, that's okay, he doesn't really want animation writers, he wants action writers. So we go off and we come up with this incredibly huge action story we call The Urban Legend, which had nothing to do with the original, with the other movie, The Urban Legend, about it was a horror movie. I can't remember what it was about. It was a horror movie of some kind. But ours was a very comic book story about this guy who's like a playboy in kind of an alternate universe, 30s, and he ends up realizing that he is one of a long line of these superheroes called the Urban Legend that people talk about but nobody's ever seen before. And so his mentor ends up getting killed, and he has to go revenge his death. And so we went in to Amblin and we pitched to Spielberg. Well, the first time we went, they said, well, okay, you go wait in this game room, which is like, unlike any other place you would go where you just sit in like a lounge. They have like a game room that's like all these video games that you can just play for hours on end. So we spent about an hour in there, and they said, Steven's not going to make it back. So you guys have to come back. So we're like, okay, we'll come back. This is a lot of fun. So we left and we came back like a week later, and it was really nerve-wracking because really, I mean, we were only like a year out of grad school. And, you know, I think every writer's dream to, you know, meet with Spielberg and pitch him something. And so we went into the room, and he was really nice, and we told him we were really nervous. And he goes, yes, everybody says that. It's no big deal. And so we managed to spit out this story that we were saying. And he goes, yeah, well, you know, I really like that. I think I want to do it. And so we're like, well, does that mean he bought it, or what does that mean? So we went to lunch, and before lunch was over, we got a call from our agent that said, yes, Steven loved the story. He's going to buy it. So we're like, oh, okay, great. Now we're writing a script for Spielberg. So we go off, and we write the script, and we turn in our first draft, and then we do a second draft of the script. And literally, it happens. Everything is happenstance. Literally, the day we turn it in, Amblin decides, you know what? We're not going to make the same kind of animated films anymore because we're going to become DreamWorks. We're going to become a whole separate company. So everything Amblin had in development went by the wayside. And they were doing Cats, and they were ready to start shooting. I mean, they had the entire script done. They had the storyboards. They had everything ready to go. They put it all on hold because Jeffrey Katzenberg showed up. Which often happens. A new person shows up, he throws everything out and starts all over again. So that ended up kind of going by the wayside. So that was kind of the end of that story, sadly, which was kind of sad. But what ended up happening for us is that we got a call from, everything is kind of bounces off another idea or another script. So we got a call from Columbia again, and they had a script. Does anybody remember the TV show SWAT? Anybody? In the 70s? It's like, it was... At the time, in the 70s, it was lambasted for being incredibly violent. But if you watch it now, you're like, this is not violent at all. It's kind of ridiculously not violent. But so they wanted to do a feature version of that. And we're like, well, okay, I think we can do that because that's kind of in our wheelhouse of action. But I don't know if you guys know anything about SWAT teams, but the problem with SWAT teams is they really show up and they just wait around for hours and hours and hours. And then maybe they have like 30 seconds of action, and then there's more waiting around. So you can't really make a movie about a guys that just show up and wait around. So for us, the problem was really coming up with a story that kind of involved the team for an entire 120 minutes of a script that was not just them sitting around. So we kind of came up with this story. In fact, actually, we were sitting in a Chinese restaurant trying to figure out what to do. And we thought, well, I don't know if anybody has seen the movie SWAT. But we thought, well, what if this like Chinese drug lord gets captured and he offers $100 million for like his freedom? And well, people would go crazy because you could believe that guy would have $100 million. And wouldn't it be crazy if it was like a Warriors kind of thing where every bad guy in the country and in the world just comes here to collect on that money? And it kind of just snowballed from there. And so we thought, well, yeah, this is a pretty fun idea. So we went in and we pitched it to the studio, and they loved the idea. They thought it was the greatest thing ever. A couple days later, we got a call from them and said, well, we're not going to hire you for guys for this, but we really love this idea, and we're going to see if we can use it for something else. We can't use it for SWAT. And we're like, well, why? What's going on? It's like, well, Oliver Stone, who was the producer on the film, wants to hire John Ridley. And he had worked with John Ridley on the movie U-Turn, and he loved John Ridley. And we're like, well, John Ridley must have the greatest idea ever. I mean, he must be great. And he said, no, John Ridley doesn't have an idea, just Oliver Stone really wants to work with him. So we're like, okay, fine. But we really loved this idea so much that we decided to write it on spec. And a spec script is basically a script that you write all on your own and you hope you can sell later. It's speculative. And so, we liked this idea. It was a fun idea. So we wrote the whole thing up. And just as we were finishing the script, we get a call from Columbia. And they said, well, Oliver Stone and John Ridley had a falling out. So they don't really want to hire John Ridley anymore. They want to hire you guys. And we were like, well, unfortunately, we've already written the script. So, I mean, it's going to cost you more money because now it's like a spec script. We could take it to anybody we wanted. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. But they really want to, because they really love this idea, so we really want to hire you guys. So we ended up selling the idea to SWAT. And most of the executives that we deal with are, I guess, not very smart. But this guy, the guy that was running the company at the time, a guy named Chris Lee, was really smart. And he basically read the script and he said, okay, there was a couple of things in it. We had a cop gets killed at the beginning on a SWAT mission, and there's a big cop funeral, and then there's some training sequences. And he goes, look, I don't want to see the SWAT team fail. So I want you to take that part out. I want you to take the funeral out. I don't want to see any training sequences. It's boring. Nobody likes that part of the movie. Nobody likes that part. Everybody's seen it a million times. I don't want to see it. I just want to start on the fly, just get into the story and get going. And so we basically developed it that way. So we did probably 6 drafts of that script and then got fired. And they brought in another writer and then got rid of him. And then brought in another writer and got rid of him. And then brought us back. And we did a couple more drafts of the script and then fired us again. And they brought in another writer and he came in and did a draft. And then ultimately, if you've seen the movie, you know the first hour of the movie is excruciatingly boring training sequences. And then the movie gets started, because what had happened is that executive had left in the middle of all that hiring and firing of people. And actually, we thought for a while the script was going to be dead. But, as happenstance happens, Columbia has a low-budget arm called Screen Gems, and they make like horror films and but movies under $25 million. We had gone into Screen Gems and met a guy named Clint Culpepper, who is a very nice guy. He's very Southern. I think he's from Mississippi, and he's very like every stereotype you would think of from somebody from the South. But he's very like to the point. If he does not like something, he'll say, "I don't like this. Get rid of it," or "This is good. This is fine," or "Change that." He's very, unlike most executives who will tap dance around it, this guy's like right to the point, which we like. I'd prefer somebody say they don't like it. But we went in and we were, kind of talking to him, and they wanted to do a sequel to the Tom Berenger movie Sniper, called Sniper 2. I know that was a real original title. And they wanted to hire us to do it. And so while we were just kind of talking, the movie SWAT came up. And at the time, SWAT was dead over at Columbia. But we had kind of talked to him about it, and he goes, "Oh, that's kind of a really cool idea. Let me check into that and see if I can get it, because I think I could do like the cheap version of it, but use the same idea." And so when he started checking at Columbia, suddenly Columbia got all interested again. And they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, this was a pretty good script. I think we could make this." And so because of his interest, Columbia decided to end up making the movie. And they gave it to Neil Moritz. The movie, this is the problem, is you write a script and you think it's really good and you really, it all works, and then it goes through development and things happen to it and it's not what you originally started out with, and it's, it becomes kind of disappointing to you, I think, in a way. And so, part of what we'll touch on later is, the ability now to just, write a script in the morning and go out and make your own film, because digital media is so in your face now. And when I was in school, you had to shoot 16 millimeter film and you had to piece it all together. And now a Mac will do all of that for you, a camera and a Mac, and you can make, a professional looking film. So, but at any rate, so the film got made and it was a success. Everybody did well in that movie, and it was very popular. So that was a happy thing. But again, like all those things, it's like you get, they fire you and they bring you back and they fire you again. It's crazy. I don't know of really any other industry in which, as an executive, you could spend $3 or $4 or $5 million and just say, forget it all, we don't want to make that. And then just move on to something else and spend $4 or $5 million more and just say, no, we don't want to make that. You would be fired if you worked at Kmart and did that. So, but at any rate, so my partner and I were really known for really action adventure kind of stories. And along those lines, we went to 20th Century Fox Family, because we had a it wasn't really a kid-friendly movie. We had gotten hooked up with a special effects group, and they wanted to make a feature, and they wanted one of their special effects guys to direct it. And so we had kind of come up with this story about this little Florida town that's invaded by big bugs. And by big, I mean like this big, not like Volkswagen size big. And it was like a small contained thing, but they could do, bugs apparently was something they could do in their special effects. They told us that. They said, we can do bugs really well. And so we're like, okay, we'll come up with a bug story. So we came up with this bug story, we took it in and we pitched it to Fox. And they did not buy that story, they did not like that story, but they really liked us. And so they said, well, why don't you guys come back and we're gonna talk to you about some other things. And so we went back a couple of weeks later and they gave us the script to Ice Age. And they said, we really want to rewrite this movie. And so we took the script home, we read it. It was a really good script. And we're like, I don't know why they'd want to rewrite this, because it was really pretty good. And so we're like kind of thinking of ways that we can write it. And in the process of us coming up with a new story, they decided, nah, you know what, we're going to keep Ice Age like it is. We're not going to. And ultimately, they made the movie almost exactly like the script they gave us. They said they wanted to rewrite. But we had, in the meantime, had come up with this idea about robots. And so they really liked that idea. And they said, well, we like this robots because it'd be really interesting to animate them. And they had just bought an animation company, Blue Sky, who were going to do Ice Age, and they were going to do robots right afterwards. So we had kind of worked on robots with Bill Joyce. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a children's author. If you have kids, you know who Bill Joyce is. He did Roly Poly Oly. He actually just won an Oscar for Best Short Film for the Flying Book short film. You guys watch the Oscars? So anyway, he's a very nice guy. He lives in Louisiana, and we had some phone conferences with him. And he did a lot of artwork for the film, so we kind of had an idea what the robots were going to look like. And then, we had finished it up, we had written a script, and then we had totally forgotten about it because animation typically takes 3 to 5 years to get done. And so we saw an ad on TV for this animated film about robots. We were like, I think we wrote that movie. I think that's the film that we wrote. So sure enough, like a week later, the attorney contacted us because they were going to do the credits for the film. And so we had to submit all of our information for the credits. But it was just really, we had forgotten about it completely. But at any rate, after we did robots, we actually got another call from Mel Gibson's company. And they wanted to make a movie about Paul Revere. And I remember this very clearly because I was in Kansas City, because I'm from Independence originally. I was visiting my family at Christmas time. And I got a call from my writing partner who said they want to make a film about Paul Revere. And the only thing I knew about Paul Revere, which is what everybody knows about Paul Revere, is the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And I'm like, well, you can't make a movie about just 30 minutes of the guy's life. And so I went to the bookstore down at the plaza, because we were down at the plaza doing something. And there was Esther Forbes had written a book about Paul Revere, like a biography. Esther Forbes wrote Johnny Tremaine. Anybody read Johnny Tremaine? A really good book. But she had written this book about Paul Revere. So I started reading the book. Paul Revere is actually an incredibly fascinating man. And once I realized that Mel Gibson was making this, I thought Mel Gibson would be the perfect Paul Revere, because Paul Revere was kind of this smart-ass guy who loved harassing the British. He kind of loved doing his own thing. He loved poking fun at people. He was married. He had like 13 kids. He was like this really fun. It was Mel Gibson. But unfortunately, Mel was not planning to star in it. He just wanted to produce the movie. This is before he went crazy, by the way. So we thought, well, Mel Gibson would be perfect as Paul Revere. So we actually ended up writing this script. And it was really, you have projects that you work on that end up dying, and it just kills you a little inside, because it was just so much fun, and it was such a great script, and it was so interesting to do, and it's so interesting to learn so much about him. He ended up getting court-martialed, then he got off being court-martialed, he got acquitted, and they ended up designing the plating for iron ships. He just did a ton of great stuff. But what ended up happening with Revere is, what often ends up happening is another movie comes out, and Hollywood goes, oh, we want to make one just like that. And so I think the film that had come out was Last of the Mohicans. And there's like this big love story in The Last of the Mohicans. So what they decided to do is, there was a love story in Paul Revere, but it was not the focus. It was a kind of a love triangle between Paul and his wife and this woman who was married to the British general who was in town in Boston, who was running the show. And what they decided to do is, well, we're going to take out the action and play up the love story, which was I felt the complete wrong way to go, but they did not feel that way. And the woman who was doing development decided that's the way she wanted to go. And ultimately, she developed it wrong because the script died at Warner Brothers. And then Paramount announced they were going to make a Paul Revere movie. But that ended up dying too. It's really a great subject for a movie. I can't believe nobody has done it, but the problem is I can't go back and do it now because I've already done one, so I can't sell it someplace else because I've already done one. But because of robots, unbelievably, we started being known as animation writers and kids writers. And in fact, when my kids were in grade school, my son used to go to school and tell people I wrote adult movies. And so I had to say, I do not write adult movies. I write movies for adults. So after Robots came out, all the third graders knew what Robots was, and they all knew, oh, okay, you wrote Robots, I know what that is now. So now my kids can actually tell them what I do when they go to school. But through that, it actually led to, we got a call from a French animation company. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but The Wizard of Oz has actually fallen into the public domain. So now everybody, if you're aware, is wanting to make Wizard of Oz movies. And so these guys wanted to do an animated Wizard of Oz movie, which we're like, well, you know, MGM really did the definitive Wizard of Oz movie. And it was really, and I, you know, after they talked to us, I went back and watched the movie again, and it just holds up so well, and it is so perfect. And I went back and read the book, which for a kid's book is incredibly violent. Dorothy is assigned to go murder people. People are getting killed right and left in that book. But they really took all the best parts out of that book and kind of molded it into a movie. And so we were the challenge was to kind of reinvent The Wizard of Oz, but not make it the 1939 version because everybody knows that. I mean, everybody has seen it because it's on TV all the time. So we went back to the original books and used more than just the first book and kind of read through them and said, well, you know, there's a lot of other stuff in here we could pull out and kind of do that would be interesting. So we wrote a script that is The Wizard of Oz, but is really nothing like the 1939 version. I mean, Dorothy is in there. And what we tried to do was take the idea of Dorothy as kind of this, and the movie really doesn't do this, but take this girl who's really on the cusp of becoming a woman and becoming responsible. And we kind of actually touch more on her being an orphan and why she's living with an aunt instead of her parents, that both of her parents are dead. And so part of her whole motivation is her parents, or her aunt is going to send her away from the farm. And because, you know, she's growing up, she shouldn't be on the farm anymore. The farms aren't for young ladies. They're for little kids. And so she runs away because she doesn't want to leave the farm. And so then she gets caught up in the whole tornado thing. And we also, you know, you can't really do the witches floating down on a bubble, and you have to really work on changing the characters so that the same but different, so you're not being compared all the time. And one thing they wanted to do is they had the rights to Over the Rainbow, and we're like, you should absolutely not use that movie, that song in this movie, because it's just going to call comparisons back to the original, which you don't want to do. And so they saw our point on that. But so we actually got a trip to France out of that. They called us up, and 2 weeks later they said, we want you guys to come to France, because I don't think they spoke great English, and they had a little trouble understanding on the phone. And so, of course, I had no passport. So I had to rush down to the federal building and say, I'm going to France in 2 weeks. I need a passport really quick. So we got passports and we took off and we met with them. They were very nice. They were very gracious. They showed us their entire operation. They do actually a lot of European TV. And they did, the show is called Magic Roundabout. What's the name of the movie with the dog? You have kids. You should have watched this movie. Well, I can't remember what the name of that movie is, but it's got the one with the little dog. But it was the Weinsteins did it. I can't remember the name of the movie they did that was released here. Huh?
My dog's skin.
No, that was not. It's an animated movie.
Tintin?
No. Well, whatever it is, it was an okay movie. My kids liked it, but they are very easy to please, I'll say. So we ended up writing the scripts for them, and unfortunately when we finished the last script apparently they were getting their financing from Lehman Brothers, and we all know what happened to Lehman Brothers. So they ended up losing their financing, so they have been scrambling to put their financing together again from different sources. But in the meantime, they had a British producer they were working with who was big in television for the BBC, and we got a call from her last June who said, we really like the Wizard of Oz you guys did, but would you be interested in doing another project from Norway? And apparently they have a TV show there called City of Friends, which is a kids' TV show. It's kind of like, sort of like Bob the Builder. It's like preschool, kindergarten, first grade kind of show. And it's about these animals there's a fireman and a policeman and an EMT, and they kind of help each other. It's the City of Friends. They're all friends. And, one of them gets a skin knee, and they all show up to help the guy with the skin knee. So it's very young. And so we're like, well, we'll meet with the guy. So the guy was coming in from Norway who, it's not funny, but he's actually on the SWAT team in Norway. And he came up with these stories, and he would tell his kids these stories, that he was a policeman. And apparently in Norway, it's very easy to get a TV show on the air if you're a SWAT member, because he said, I just walked in and I pitched this idea and they loved it, and they said, let's put it on the air. And that would never happen here, but it happened in Norway. So we met with him, and we didn't hear from him for a long time. And part of it, I don't know if you guys remember in Norway, that guy that went crazy and shot everybody up in Oslo. That's because he was busy working on that, because he's on the SWAT team. So we didn't hear from him for like 4 or 5 months. And we're like, well, maybe this is going to work out, maybe it's not. And then out of the blue, he calls and goes, okay, I'm ready to go forward with City of Friends. Let's get this job done. So that's what we're working on now. But I guess it really kind of, dovetails into really how, digital storytelling has really affected Hollywood, because, now before, when I first started out, when I first graduated from here and went to California, it was hard to work anywhere but Los Angeles and work in the mainstream film industry. There was like little pockets in like Florida or maybe Texas, but it was really almost impossible to have a career unless you were some kind of really small regional filmmaker or a documentary filmmaker. But it was hard to be a Hollywood screenwriter and live in Kansas City or live in Denver or live in some place that was outside the norm. But now, technology has really made it a lot easier to really do films worldwide. I'm not sure we would ever had an opportunity to do a film with a Norwegian producer before, but now with the Skype and the internet, it's easy to contact him. It's easy to have face-to-face conversations with him and say, okay, this is what we're working on. What do you think of this? What do you think of this idea? It's also easy to, send him pages, whereas before you'd have to, mail them or fax them, which would take forever. But now it's instantaneous. You can do it as a PDF and send him a script. In fact, I'm not sure, and Sean might know, but do they even send scripts anymore? It's rare. Everybody sends a PDF of their script.
It's all PDF.
It's all PDF. So if you're getting a script, you're not getting the actual script. Before, I feel sorry for the messengers in Los Angeles, because I don't know what they are messengering anymore, because nobody delivers scripts anymore. They all just send them PDFs. But part of, I think part of the history of digital in Hollywood goes back to, really, believe it or not, George Lucas and Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Company. When George Lucas was doing Star Wars, the technology for the special effects really didn't exist the way he wanted to do them. And he was really one of the first filmmakers to actually use computers to do some of his special effects. They didn't actually do the effects like a CGI effect, but he would use them for, I don't know, you guys surely have seen Star Wars, right? Okay, so when they are trekking along the Death Star, that was all computer aided. He would have a computer track, so the camera could do the same motion again and again and again, rather than having variations every time. He also created a company called the Graphics Group as part of ILM, and ILM is Industrial Light and Magic. That is the effects company he basically created to make Star Wars. Before, the only other really big, effects company before that was, John Dykstra and his work on 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was the pinnacle of space technology. But initially, Graphics Group really just sold hardware. They sold a computer, and the people that were interested in the computer was Disney, because it was kind of in fact, the name of the computer was the Pixar Image Computer. And they wanted it to, Disney was interested because they wanted to make animation cheaper, because animation before computers, everything was hand-drawn, and it was very laborious, and it took many years, and it was very expensive. So Disney was looking for a way to cut costs, make it cheaper. Unfortunately, the Pixar Image Computer never really took off. And so George Lucas, I think, got kind of tired of it, and apparently, as a little gossip, I think he needed some money because he was getting a divorce at the time. So he ended up selling Pixar to Stephen Jobs. And in that deal came John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, who, if you don't know, are really the driving force behind Pixar animation. And again, they were still trying to promote this computer thing, but the whole time, John Lasseter was making these little short films, trying to demonstrate the digital technology that was available or that could be done. And the first film they made was Luxo Jr., which I don't know if any of you have seen that, but it's the little lights that are bouncing on the ball and they kick it back and forth. It actually won an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film. And it's a very charming little film, but it really kind of pointed the way to really where CGI could go. And in fact, Pixar was instrumental in actually doing the first computer special effect, the first all-computer special effect. I don't know if any of you remember Star Trek II, when they do the Genesis project. I know it wasn't a very popular movie, but when the entire planet turns into a big green Earth from nothing, that was an entirely computer-generated effect, and it was done by Pixar. And they actually were also responsible for doing the first computer-generated character, which, if you've seen Young Sherlock Holmes, anybody seen that one? When the guy comes down from the stained glass window, the knight comes down from the stained glass window, and they have a fight, or the guy, the character was completely computer-generated. And again, it was kind of a wave of the future of what was going to be happening. And after that, they basically kept doing their short films until they decided to make a feature. And it was a big risk for them because nobody had ever done a feature. Kind of like Disney with S.W.a.t. Nobody had ever done a feature animated film before. Nobody had ever done a feature CGI film. And nobody knew audiences might reject it because it looks, clearly if you've seen Toy Story, which was the first film they did, first computer generated, it looks a little weird compared to flat animation. And especially this is coming off Disney making $300 million off Lion King, like the year before. And so everybody was very nervous about this whole computer animation thing because nobody was sure it was going to work.
Hey, Jim, real quick. It's fitting because who's in the room? Of course, at this point in the story, Hallmark had the opportunity and made the decision they were supposed to be buying Pixar. And decided, I don't know if we're really going to be behind that or not.
Oh, that's funny. I did not know that. Because Stephen Jobs only bought it for $5 million. He sold it for $5 million. And now,
it was on the table.
I think Disney ended up buying them for $7.4 billion.
Yeah, it would have been a good investment.
And they basically took over. They basically took over Disney. No, they took over Disney Animation. But really that kind of spearheaded the whole digital revolution in Hollywood. And now almost every TV show you see, in fact, I can't really think of any TV shows that are shot on film. All of them are digitally shot. I have some friends that work in TV that are TV producers, and they say, we never work in film anymore. It's all digital. And in fact, really now, I think probably in the next 10 years, all feature films will probably end up being shot digitally. I'm not sure any of them will be shot on film anymore, in part because Kodak went out of business. They declared bankruptcy. I don't know. We'll see what they do. But now in 2009, the first digital, Slumdog Millionaire was the first film to win an Oscar that was shot digitally for cinematography. And basically that kind of paved the way because again, I believe Hugo won this year. That was also shot digitally. Of the 5 films nominated, which you guys don't watch the Oscars, so 2 of them were actually shot digitally. And I don't know how many of you saw Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I mean, it looked phenomenal, and it was shot digitally. Not a stick of film in the whole thing, but it's really revolutionized what Hollywood can do with a film because now you can beam dailies all over the world. And in fact, the film Sniper 2 that we had worked on was the first film to have its dailies beamed because they shot it in Eastern Europe. I wish I could remember where they shot it. Romania, I think, or Hungary. They shot it in Hungary. And they beamed the dailies all back to Hollywood digitally. So it's just almost instantaneous, the feedback you can get. There's no more waiting. There's no more couriers that need to be used. And really, it's not only how the films are shot, but it's the delivery system. Avatar was the first film that was put in theaters that actually made more money from its digital delivery system than it being films spinning in theaters. And in fact, eventually in the next 5 years, there will be no films in theaters anymore. It'll all be digital. In the little town I live in California, both the theaters there are digital. They don't drop films off anymore. There's no big 35 millimeter films. It's all digital delivery. They're all shown digitally. They can show them a million times, which in some ways is kind of nice because I don't know if you ever when you were like 10 days or 12 days into a film and it started getting scratches in it and rips and tears and the film was not in that great a shape. But I guess really part of it, and what it really all comes down to is the possibilities that digital opens up for storytellers. And I guess part of it is, I mean, and I know other people have touched on it before, of the internet and computers and Apple TV and YouTube, and those are all great delivery systems, but I think the biggest problem people are having is, how do you make money? How do you make money from YouTube? Other than, you get 2 million hits and they contact you to say, oh, would you like to put an ad on your YouTube video of your kid throwing up a worm? And then you make, $100. But really, I mean, for big providers, or anyone who really wants to make a film and find a way to make a living at it, what's going to be the challenge in the future is finding a way to make money off of that. And in fact, on the way out, on the plane ride out here, I had downloaded Downton Abbey to my iPad, and I watched it on the way out here. And it was, I hadn't seen it before. My writing partner had seen the whole first season and was watching this. He said, this is the greatest show ever. You should watch this show. And so I put it on the iPad and I started watching it. And, I'm like, well, to me, this is really the way of the future, is on demand. When you want to watch something, you will have a chance to watch it. But the really key is, how is the person who does the content going to make money off of that? And that's really that's really the key question. And Apple TV has sort of figured it out, in that, I don't know if you guys know how Apple TV works. I just got my good lesson. My writing partner is Mr. Techno. He just got his new Apple TV and had to show me all how it works. But I mean, basically, it's like broadcast TV, but you basically pay for shows and you can get the entire season. So if you wanted to watch Justified, the whole first season, you can go to your Apple TV and you can download the whole thing for $3 an episode or $30 for the whole season and watch it all in one sitting. So rather than now being tied to the network schedule of, I have to sit down on a Thursday night and I have to watch 30 Rock and then I have to watch Modern Family on Wednesday, you could wait until the end of the season and see the whole thing and go do other things. So they've sort of figured out a way, but they have not figured out a way to make it quite profitable yet, because it's still free on regular TV. And interestingly, with regular TV, and even with feature film, a lot of people have talked about feature films kind of leaving, and there's not going to be any theaters in the future, they're not going to do feature films. I don't really subscribe to that, in part because I think as long as movies are a date night destination, there'll still be kids that go to the movies. So I think they will, I don't think movies are going to leave the theaters, because as long as 16-year-olds have to go somewhere on a Friday night, they're going to go to the movies. But I think TV is going to have it a lot harder. And if you look at now an audience of 10 million for your show, I mean, that's a pretty sizable audience. That's a big hit. But 20 years ago, you would have been canceled for 10 million. That's nothing. I mean, it's just ridiculous how far the standards have lowered for a television program to become a hit on TV. I mean, clearly, well, I had this written down here, if I could mention this earlier. Clearly somebody is still going to the movies, because Bridesmaids made $170 million. I mean, and it was a great movie, but clearly, for the right movie, there are people that will go see it. I mean, you still have movies Transformers somehow made like $300 million. I don't know who went and saw that movie or who understood that movie. But clearly, I mean, I think there's an audience for movies, which is why I don't think they're ever going to go away. And I think that studios or producers that try to do you can do the computer download in the theaters at the same time. I don't really, that's almost like undercutting yourself, I think, to say this film isn't good enough to make it in the theaters. But I think there'll still be an audience in the theaters for that. Now, that concludes my prepared remarks. I could wing some unprepared remarks if you'd like. I know I didn't really talk about the process of writing, and I kind of wanted to touch on that really quickly, so that's not prepared. So, because it was interesting, is the way we write, my partner and I, is, I mean, we really are big consumers of information. I mean, I actually still read magazines, so but we'll scan content on the internet, or we'll listen to other people talk. And it was really interesting, the guys that did the Media Storm, who did the story about the kid with the SNA. And I'm watching that story, and it was really interesting. But what really struck me, and part of this is for any writer, is to find a way into the story that's not the typical way. And they found one way into the story. But for me, what I found really interesting about that story was the kid in the water. I had never really thought about it before, but if you were trapped in a wheelchair your whole life and suddenly found a way to be out of that chair and free and like everybody else and equal to everyone else, That would be amazing. And that's kind of how that kid was in the water. So for me, if I were going to do a story about that, I mean, that's what I took away from it, is like I would build the story around that idea. And that might not be the main idea of the story. That might just be one of the characters in the story. But to me, that was really fascinating. But it's kind of, for me, the process is picking out a detail and being able to build a character or a story around that, and making it interesting and making it relatable to what everyone wants to watch, or making it somehow emotional or relatable. But we do it actually both ways. We'll come up with an idea, or sometimes we'll come up with a character. Sometimes I'll read a news story about a guy, especially, I don't know if you guys remember the tailhook scandals. I know. In journalism, you should remember some of this. It was really fascinating to me that all of these Navy flyers are in trouble for all this sexual harassment stuff. But I kind of started thinking about, well, what about the guy who rats out his friends? And is it really ratting it out because the guys who are sexually harassing these women and raping these women are really going against a whole other code in the Navy? And it kind of became an interesting character of a guy who informs on these other guys who are doing bad stuff, and kind of the headbutting they do about, this guy has one code and this guy has another code, and how they kind of conflict. And so we ended up coming up with a whole story about a Navy pilot who testifies against other pilots for doing some bad stuff, and he ends up kind of getting ostracized, but then they have to call on him in the end of the story. So, I mean, for us, the process, the stories come from every place. Okay, now I'm done. Okay, any questions? Yep.
What program do you write in?
We use screenwriter. Although I would say anybody who wants to take up screenwriting, because it's easy to do, but it's not easy to do well. A screenwriting program is almost essential, although there's actually one online, which my writing partner wrote down for me, so I would mention it. I think it's called Celltex, but it's a free download, and that actually is a really good program too. I think it's CELTEX, is that it? TIX, yeah, okay. He wrote that down and said, oh, you should mention this, and I didn't bring that notepad with me. But it's a really good program if you're gonna actually do any writing.
I should mention, by the way, we have another filmmaker amongst us too, Sean McClain, who's been working with us, Sean McClain, who's been working with us on the digital storytelling initiative on campus as well, is a Hallmarker who does films for the Hallmark Hall of Fames for the Hallmark channel. So I have no doubt you've seen quite a lot of Sean's work.
Oh, yes, I'm sure you have.
Well, the one interesting point that you made, we used to get an 80 million viewership audience. Today, if we get a 12 million viewership audience, we've hit a home run. So
exactly.
That's how diversified
I mean, it's just,
it is.
I really, honestly, I don't know how networks stay in business.
It's changing.
They need some kind of new model. And that model cannot be sticking it to the writers, so which they seem to think that's what they should do. So
in reality, it won't carry on forever. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious with the way that we now consume digital content. I haven't had live TV in about 4 years. I watch everything online, but I found that I consume a lot more TV and movies, dangerous amounts. And I'm wondering if, because of how searchable it is, you can find, you can follow directors, you can follow writers, you can go all the way back into the back catalog in a way you could never have before. You can watch shows that have been canceled for years. Mm-hmm. Is any of that availability and the ability to follow different creators, is that trickling down to writers having more clout or more importance in the industry, or is that still a long way off? Okay.
Writers have no... Of the people above the line, the writers are the lowest person above. And above the line is people who are above the title, who are not like the gaffers and the grips. Like the stars, the directors, the producers, and the writers are all at the top, and the writers are at the bottom of the top. We have no power. But again, it is interesting that you bring that question up, because now that people are able to, use their iPhones to go out and make a movie, you're basically the master of your own domain. So, I mean, you are completely in charge of that. And now that digital technology, I mean, my digital video camera can almost shoot as good as a professional. So I could go out and make a movie. And if you look at Downton Abbey, I mean, the whole thing takes place in a house. Now, granted, it's a giant house, but I mean, if somebody had the wherewithal to write eight scripts about some people that live in a house, you could go out tomorrow and do this script and shoot the whole thing and put it all online, and you would be in complete control of everything. I mean, you're the writer, you're the producer. I mean, you can't obviously the actors are going to do their thing. You can't control them. And believe me, I know you cannot control them. But I mean, it really gives you a lot more flexibility than has ever been possible before. But it would be nice if writers had more clout, but the only way you get more clout is kind of to become a director or work in TV. Film writer, have never done TV except a couple of TV movies, but writers in TV have all the clout. I mean, if you're David Kelly, you call the shots. If you are a TV producer, you call the shots. If you are a movie writer, you call nothing. You call your wife. That's what you call. You really have no power whatsoever. And so that's why a lot of writers end up going into TV just for that reason, so they'll have more control. And even to have more control, they go to like the cable networks, like Showtime, HBO. It's almost impossible to work for the networks now because they are so meddling in whatever you want to do, because nobody wants to get fired. So everybody's like putting all their 2 cents. What I call it is, it's like a dog marking their territory. They just got to pee all over your stuff. So it's like, oh, see, that was my idea to come up with that, so they can justify it to their bosses. So if you really want to have control, go into TV. Yeah, back there.
You talked a lot about changes in filmmaking technology, and I was wondering.
Or talk louder. Film technology, yes, okay.
Okay, you've talked a lot about changes in technology, and I was wondering if those changes have sort of influenced the screenwriting process at all. Like, obviously, the basics of a story stay the same, but is there anything that's?
Curiously, in some ways, no. I mean, the process for me has not changed in terms of, we'll come up with an idea and it will take us 3 or 4 months to write the whole thing up. For me, the fun part is actually, we plot the story out in incredible detail, and that's the fun part for me. And then the actual writing is really drudgery. But for us, that process hasn't really changed. So in that sense, technology hasn't really changed anything. Only in the sense that now you can have more immediacy to whatever you write, if you choose to. And believe me, for the lady here who's going to direct, Downton Abbey in Columbia, it really takes a lot of perseverance to do that. Not only to write 8 episodes of TV, but then to the logistics of putting it all together. It's just unimaginable how much work it would be. But there are people that do it, and people, on that small a scale, that put it all together like that. So, but for us, the process, the new technology hasn't really changed the process, except computers. I remember writing my first, I think Jose showed that little mini Apple up there. I had a computer just like that. And I had my dot matrix printer printing off my scripts. So I don't know how writers in the 50s and 40s did typewriters. I just have no idea. You must I know what I'm going to say, and it's going to come out perfect, and I'm not changing it. So that's, to me, amazing. So any more questions? Did you have one? No? Was that the same question? That's okay, just talk loud.
I was just wondering, is the divide kind of between a TV writer and a movie writer just because of the process? Like, you'd write a script and then they'd direct off the script that you've already written, as opposed to where you'd write a TV show and you'd stick with that show. Seasons,
Well, honestly, in a feature, if you write a script, that's not even the finished script. They are writing it on the set. The director could do whatever they want. He could throw the entire script down and says, everybody ad lib. The director really can do whatever he wants as long as the studio says he can do it. In TV, though, if an actor wants to change his line, he has to go to the producer and say, can I change this line? And the producer has to say, no, you can't, or yes, you can. Now, sometimes, I don't want to name names, but if anybody watches Burn Notice, the guy that runs that show, the actor that runs that show, supposedly is kind of a pain to deal with, and he likes to do things his own way. And part of it is, once you kind of become an actor on a big show like that, you kind of get to have a little more clout. And I know on the Roseanne show, that led to, I think, 2 showrunners getting fired because she thought she was running the show. And, she was the star of the show, so they let her run the show. So.
Well, and that's the difference between feature films and TV.
Exactly.
TV producers really are in charge, and on
Exactly.
a feature film, the director is the captain of the ship, and
Exactly.
that is James Cameron, and he tells everyone what to do.
And when you see a TV show, all those producers you see are actually writers. Well, I'll say 90% of them are writers. So if you see, executive producer, co-executive producer, all those guys are writers. And if you watch the show a lot, you'll see their names come up on writing the scripts. Now, there may be one or two that are like the star's manager that just get a contractual, or the star as a producer. They don't write any scripts.
Associate producer is assistant.
Exactly.
Associate producer means
exactly.
assistant.
Associate producer, the assistant. So, but in TV, credit is important because not only do you get paid for the original script, you get paid residuals, and that can be 3 or 4. Because all the richest people in Hollywood are in TV. And the reason for that is every time that show airs, you get paid. If it airs in Dubai, you get paid. If it airs in South Africa, you get paid. If it airs 10 times in South Africa, you get paid 10 times. So outside of Spielberg and James Cameron, all the richest people in Hollywood are TV producers because they make a ton of money off the shows they have been producing and off their residuals. So that's just an extra tidbit for you. So now you got into TV producing. Although interestingly, it's probably harder, I think, and you may know this. I think it's harder to get into TV writing than it is to feature writing, because really studios are always looking for scripts. If you're writing a script and you're writing good scripts, it will always get read by somebody. They're always looking for good scripts. They go through so many scripts a year, it's ridiculous.
Well, it can be a one-off too. This is a great idea, and we make it into a movie.
Exactly,
The actors have to
exactly.
sustain on and on. And on.
With TV, it's much more of an audition process. You have a lot more hoops to jump through, and it's a lot harder to get on a show because showrunners, those TV producers, run them like their little kingdom. So they only want certain guys and certain things, and they're real sticklers that way. So. You work more in TV than I do.
That's who Charlie Sheen fought with. It was the showrunner.
Exactly. That Charlie Sheen, 2.5 Men is a perfect example of a star that just went crazy, and of course he ended up getting fired, and the showrunner won that one. The showrunner won that one. But that showrunner he's so big though that they're not going to fire him. He's got 3 shows on CBS. We're not going to fire him. So, any other questions? No? Yes?
You talked a lot about getting fired.
And, because I've been fired a lot.
So I'm wondering, today it's, with the media changing, journalists are having a lot harder time, I guess, than before, staying on payroll, a lot of freelancing. How did you support yourself back then, and how do you support yourself now if Hollywood seems to fire everyone?
Well, interestingly, everybody gets fired, but it usually leads to another job. So, unlike a newspaper reporter who I'm working for, Kansas City Star, and I get fired there, I have to go find a job at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or if that's still a paper, or I have to go work at the Tribune, or I have to go work at some other paper, or find some other way to support myself, as opposed to Hollywood, where and sometimes sometimes it's not really so much they send you a pink slip and say you're fired. They just, you do your contracted drafts and they don't ask you back to do more. They hire somebody else. Sometimes they do ask you back to do more. And so really, while you're working on a project, you're always looking for your next project, or you're always working on something else. You're always writing something else. And so in part, you also, when you write a script, you get paid a crap load of money. I will not dispute that. And if you work in TV, you get paid even more money, I think, ultimately. But the trap to that is, if you're getting paid, say, $200,000 to do a script, which is, average, you could do that. That may have to last you for 2 years, so you can have to budget. So it's good if your wife works or husband works.
But I would say you're not tarnished because you got fired.
No, exactly. It's
That
not.
is
It doesn't.
understood as part of the process. When we have a
Yeah.
writing team and we let them go, everyone just understands creative differences, moved on to the next project.
It doesn't. It's not a mark against you. So it's not always bad, unless you threw down with the producer and you got fired and you're a trouble.
I guess the next question to that would be so you come up with a story and then they bring another writer in. Don't you feel like they're kind of taking your story? Because that's what
Yes, I do. Can you do something about that? I honestly, it is very hard. In fact, that's really why it's hard for me to go back and see any of the films that we've had made. SWAT is on TV a lot, and or lately it's been on a lot. And really the first half of the movie is not ours. That was the other writers came up with all of that. But I never go back and watch it. And you know, I always thought before we had movies, I mean, it took us 10 years to get a movie made of constant writing. And we got close a lot of times, but it never happened. And then you always think, oh, if I had a movie made, I'd watch it all the time. But you're kind of like, no, I don't want to watch it because it's just hard to watch. Because this would have been better if they'd done it this way, or the best you can hope for is it's better than I thought it was going to be. That's always SWAT was better than I thought it was going to be. I guess that's how I look at it.
And you had two at the exact same time, so it took in essence a decade of consistently being hired year after year after year.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden,
And then we
boom,
got like
both got
3 made in like 2 years.
Yeah.
It was like bam, bam, bam. It was right really fast. And then we haven't had anything made since. But it could
Wait
turn
another
around.
year.
So we still have time. Any more questions? No? Good? No.
Thank you
What?
very much, Jim.
You are welcome.